Let me tell a tale of a world where heroes walk among us, fighting through the darkness left by monsters and by selfish men. A tale of glory rents asunder, sacrifice and battles lost. Our heroes know not what awaits them, and still they carry on. Let me sing a song of a family forged by trials and woe. On their own they falter, but together they will write their own tale of glory, rent asunder, sacrifice and battles lost. Our heroes know not what awaits them, and still they carry on. What was rent shall be restored. What was lost now shall be found. The price of valor ever rising, but victory brings new rewards. Tales of glory, might, and wonder, hard-fought battles, treasures won. Our heroes know their fate awaits them, and so they carry on.
Oh, that's the wrong screen. There we go. Hello, everybody. How's it going? It's me, Pixel and Beast, and we are here
What's up?
on Ages of Einor to talk to you guys about Draw Steel. If folks don't know what that is, Draw Steel is the MCDM RPG.
Yeah, it's their new system.
Yeah. So what we have in our hands is the backer packet. So this is all playtest material, just big caveat there. What we're going to be talking about is what's in the playtest. Obviously, things can and will change, before the final version of this thing is released. But we just kind of wanted to give like our first impressions of this, talk about it a little bit in case anyone's interested in this system. I know that like for me personally, I'm getting less and less interested in 5th edition D&D over time. Every decision that WotC makes, everything that they do, ever since like the OGL, and even somewhat before that, my interest has been steadily declining and continuing to either buy their products, play their adventures, just any of it, So I'm kind of, part of why I'm talking about this is to, what are the alternatives? What's out there? And
There's so many great games out
Yeah.
there, and it's high time we gave a lot of them a good chance.
Yeah, exactly. And so we want to talk about Draw Steel. Part of the thing with Draw Steel, they were always planning, MCDM, if you don't know, is Matt Colville's company, basically based predominantly on his D&D channel, but he has accrued a number of extremely talented designers. A lot of the people who were working in like the homebrew 5e space, among other things, and I'm sure have worked on a lot of other games. I don't know who their whole team is, but I have not come across a single person that's like making content for that company that I'm like, oh, this guy sucks. Like everyone's amazing. It's just like accruing all the best people, practically that you can find, and it's tremendously interesting. So we want to talk about this game, so people get a sense of like what it is, what our thoughts about it are, um, and hopefully some people will maybe want to try it out. I will also caveat we have not gotten a chance to actually play yet, so this is just like first impressions, reading through the rules, which are in a PDF with currently like no formatting really, no art. Like it's just raw dogging text here. Um, so that's rough. Obviously, the final book will be gorgeous because everything they put out is gorgeous. But yeah. So, any other caveats we need to throw in there? You think?
Nah, if you're interested in tabletop games, if you're interested in role playing games, or if you like tactical combat games that you would like to play collaboratively with your friends in a lo-fi setting, I think that you're going to be really interested in some of the stuff that we got to talk about tonight.
Excellent. And we will be responding to chat a little bit as well. Delport is excited to see what we think of it, and that's how we are. We're doing great, Delport.
What's up, Delport?
And yeah, I'm excited to jump in.
So this is tactical, heroic, cinematic fantasy.
Yes.
So from get, they know exactly what they want to be, who they are, the kind of game that they are attempting to, the kind of setting that they are attempting to mechanize. And I think that they just, from the sense I get from reading through this thing, I think that they're doing a great friggin' job.
Yeah. Yeah, my top line takeaways are much in line with that. This game, as we said, it knows what it wants to be. It has a vision of like it's really the vibe. It has a vision of a vibe of what's going on, right? And those keywords, they come back to those over and over again. Tactical, cinematic, heroic, fantasy, right? So that's one of the first things that I really like is how clear and upfront they are with that. And I know a lot of like non D&D games in the TTRPG space do a great job of front loading that information of like, hey, this is what this game is about. And the other thing I think they do a great job is not just like telling you what the game is about, but then every like mechanic that you see in the game seems like they tried as hard as they could to like support what they say the game is about with the mechanics that they're giving you.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, I think, always a hallmark of people who like really know what they're doing in the game design space.
There's also a really cool design approach that I see embedded in a lot of that I feel like I can sort of like get a sense of from the decisions in this game system, in that these people play tabletop games and they play a lot of different systems.
Yeah.
And because they play many different systems, they actually know the things that are fun when where the fun comes from in those systems.
Yeah.
And they said, we need to just like, why is this fun? Let's figure out how to make it as fun as possible, and then let's figure out how that will translate like in terms of like a setting component, like the narrative and the mechanics of it. We're putting it all together, and I think that approach is awesome. I see it everywhere across this system.
Yeah. So we are just kind of gonna jump around and talk about things that we really liked about it. So maybe things that we aren't as keen on, and so on and so forth. They've done a lot of really, really interesting things. One of the first things I want to kind of bring attention to, I feel like they've done a good job of just like cutting the dead weight of D&D, right? I think D&D, because it is such a historied, long-running IP or what, system, blah, 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 blah. It comes to the table with all of these different like solutions to problems and ways of having fun that they came up with in the past. And it's not like it's a game that was designed to be fun from the ground up You know, it's like people designed this game, and the very first people really didn't know what they were doing. You know, and there's like,
Yeah.
and then over time, people have like sanded the rough edges and tried to like take what the ball that they had and morph it into something that was better and more fun. And largely, they've succeeded at that. But this is really cool and refreshing to see people who are like, okay, you know, we took the concept of tabletop role playing games that we've all played, we've all loved, you know, and we threw out all the stuff that we didn't think would be fun that D&D is stuck with, because it's, you know, it's not D&D if you don't have the D20 roll, and you don't have the nat 1 and the nat 20, and you don't have, you know, strength, dex, con, int, whiz, chaw, you know what I mean?
Fancy and magic, right?
Yeah, if you don't have the spell slots, if you know, it's like, and so they're like, well, if we're not bound by that, we, you know, and we can kind of do whatever we want, but at the same time, I also feel like they don't get lost in the sauce. It's like tactical, heroic, you know, cinematic fantasy. It's like they're not including stuff that doesn't fit in that framework, and so I think they've done a really good job of like being innovative and cool and interesting, and we'll talk about specifically what innovations those are, jettisoning a lot of the stuff that like you don't need, you know, the stuff that we get with the D&D.
And, you know, there's actually this game does not have like many mechanics. Like it's actually somewhat surprisingly minimal in terms of like these are like the kinds of things that you do in the game. And it's like you roll 2d10 and you roll 2d10 for like most stuff. And then occasionally you have to roll a couple of d6 or something. Right. And that's only in like a few situations. And then the rest of the time, you're just telling a story.
Yeah.
And they get a lot of mileage with like very few ideas.
I think so too. Another thing I want to call out is that in the intro paragraphs about what is a game, like they're so confident in what their vision of this game is that they're like, if you're looking for X, Y, or Z, this game is not that, and here's the game you should play instead. And that, I love it so much, because it's like, I'm actually learning about some games I never heard of, and I'm like, actually, that kind of sounds fun. Like, I went through and Googled all of the different games. They recommend Shadow Dark for fighting monsters in a dungeon.
Call of Cthulhu, I think.
They recommend Forbidden Lands for, like, hexploration stuff. They recommend Call of Cthulhu, which I have played. Oh, and they hyperlink to it. Uh-oh. And then I closed my web browser like a dingus. Hang on, gang.
But that I think is what I think there's an idea that Dungeons and Dragons is this Swiss Army knife of tabletop, in that it is a system where you can tell like any kind of story. Yeah. And I think instead of it being I guess a Swiss Army knife is still a good analogy, because it's like every single tool in a Swiss Army knife is sort of a degraded, simplified version of the thing that it's supposed to be, so its utility is kind of bad. And if you just had a knife, you could probably do more with just a good knife than you could a Swiss Army knife.
Yeah.
And that's what this is. This is a really sharp knife.
Yeah, it's a really sharp knife for heroic fantasy games. Another thing, and this goes up to something someone said in chat. Lil Nugget says, I have a hard time understanding tabletop games that aren't D&D, but that may be because I'm so used to D&D. 100%, right? And I think that's something, reading through this, me as a person who, like, I've played a few. I'm not someone who's played every tabletop game out there, right? I've had some experience with D&D, Pathfinder, Starfinder, Pathfinder 2E. I've looked at Pugmire. I've looked at Stars Without Number. I've looked at Star Wars 5e, Kids on Brooms. You know, I've looked at a few, right? And one of the things that I will say is, I think in the long run going to be great for this game, but is a bit of a hump when you first start it, is there is a lot of really specialized new language, right? Like they have kind of almost proprietary terms that they're using for how some of the things in the game work, which are, I think they're really clear a lot of the time, with what
I think
this stuff
they
is.
they do a good job defining
Yeah.
the things that they have in here, but it can be confusing if you are coming from another system. In that some of the things in this game are stock and standard
Mhm.
in a game like D&D, to the point where it's like it feels like a reskinning of the idea.
Yeah.
I think that's sort of a uh, I don't think that that's what that is. Like, I don't think they actually reskinned anything. I think they legitimately rethought a lot of classic roleplay or TTRPG
Yeah.
mechanics, and then said, now, how do we want it to happen
Right.
in our game?
Yeah.
And
But it
yeah,
does come down to, in a fantasy hero game, there are things that are going to come up. And if you're presenting a novel solution and you have your own proprietary name for it, it just takes a little getting used to and like figuring out,
yeah.
okay, I see this word popping up a lot. Like, what are they meaning with that? So I think once you get acclimated to it, just in the same way we all had to get acclimated to D&D, right?
It feels very Kingdoms of Warfare, where
Mm-hmm.
you're doing this almost mechanically. You're doing the same thing with like fighting unit to unit as you would a PC to an NPC or a mob
Yeah.
in a D&D game. But they use different words, like, oh, it's a test. It's not an
Mm-hmm.
attack roll. It's sort of like that.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a couple
The
things
nuance.
that I wanted to call out. We're not going to talk about when we're not going to. This is not a how-to, and maybe we should have also said that up front. We're not going to teach you how to play Draw Steel, right? We're going to give you our first impressions of the various things that we've seen in Draw Steel. There
Right.
are other people out there on the internet who will teach you how to play Draw Steel. I will probably be watching some of those people before I go to play it
Same.
for the first time, and so should you. So that's the first thing. Also, they have a Discord. The MCDM has a Discord. They have a big section of Draw Steel. People are already like making homebrew stuff for this game. With the backer
Incredible.
stuff, they're making kits. They're making nobody's made like classes yet that I'm aware of, but they're making kits. They're making like monsters. They're making little adventures and stuff. It's all great. Okay.
Awesome.
So moving on, one of the things that we saw that we thought was really, really, or I did, I think you mostly agree with this, things that we thought that were really, really cool. There's a big section when you're making your hero around
yeah.
like culture and
It's
not just
culture,
species,
background,
right? Yeah.
and like it's also sort of your I think what they did is they sort of took the ideas of nature and nurture, and they broke it down into mechanical examples,
Yeah.
and they did a really good job at it.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of stuff in here about like culture and what it means to like understand what type of environment your character came from. Like, were they in a hierarchical, authoritarian kind of a structure? Were they in like a communal structure? Stuff like that, really, really cool. And like you can already see how, in addition to D&D, which is just like, here's a background, it gives you some stuff. This is saying like, think about how your character's environment shaped how that character is. If you have, you know, a human knight who was a noble who came from a hierarchical standpoint, and a human, you know, fighter who comes from like a very
Nomadic
like agrarian,
culture or
yeah, comes from like a very agrarian communal structure. Like those characters end up at day one, they show up at your table different. I love that. One of the things we thought was maybe some of the coolest stuff I've seen is the thing about career. So you have a culture, which is like, what's the environment your character grew up in? You have a career, which is zeroing in a little bit on like,
That's the nurture part
know.
of the nature nurture, in my
yeah,
opinion.
and it's like, so what did you do before you became an adventurer, right? D&D has this as well. The thing that I love that they do that D&D doesn't, this bit right here, the inciting incident. They say, okay, you used to be an adventurer. There used to be something else. Now you're an adventurer.
Right.
There's a reason that happened, and we want to like help you come to the table with a strong understanding of what that was, right?
Right.
And what I think it does really, really well is it gets to motivation. And I think that's
Exactly.
one of the things that like when you're starting out with tabletop games and making characters, telling stories, all this stuff, like everyone talks about it a lot. Oh, your character should have a motivation and this and that. And it's like you don't always get a lot of concrete steps. How do I actually do that? The inciting incident stuff in Draw Steel, which is all these examples that they give you for various different types of careers and things that might have been your inciting incident, are just chef's kiss. Absolutely great.
Right, because it drills down to this idea. I feel like the difference in D&D, where you have like backgrounds and like flaws and things, those sort of dance around you helping to like figure out your character's like personality and ideologies, but it doesn't necessarily always explain why did your character become an adventurer.
Mhm.
This inciting incident, it actually links those two intrinsically. It's chaining your past to your present and saying there is a direct line because of this. This is the chain that binds your past to your present. And that's important because all of you used to be just some guy before you became an adventurer. Why?
Yeah, and this section that's like just the, you know, a little bit way down the page, right under inciting incident. This section, it just says what was taken from you, right? And I just love that because again, in creating heroic characters, right? This is a great way to think about the motivation of a heroic character, right? Is that like it could be something you know, there's
It's
this is
righting
the thing
a
that motivates
wrong.
You're righting some kind of a wrong, right? And it could be like, and the thing is, it's not just like, oh, somebody stole my favorite hat, and this, you know, it's like, it's a sense of loss in the character that you're trying to like either fix or it affected you and now you're different, right? So it's like, you know, it could be, you know, like it's I can't exactly even figure out how to explain this.
So here's a good example of one of my favorites. Maybe this can help shape it a little bit. The Gladiator has this inciting incident called the Heckler.
Yes.
Where you are the gladiator. So your character, your hero, was once this gladiator, and they just won a fight. And someone stands up in the crowd and goes, you know, all you do is use your power and your violence for this. This is frivolous. It's useless death. You have all of this skill to kill, to take life, to do damage, and you don't use it for anything other than just this frivolousness. Like, why don't you do something useful? You should be ashamed of yourself. You're a killer.
Yeah.
And for your character to be like, oh wow, I actually owe the universe a debt for my past. That's why I'm a hero. I'm undoing my past.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just great. Delport says, Matt says in one of his videos, the hero doesn't seek adventure. The call knows where you live. The call to adventure knows where you live. The call to adventure has your goddamn phone number. And then
right, has you on speed dial.
Like a scammer. Heroes are reactive. Motivation chase you up a tree and force you to become a hero. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good way to think about it. And so I love that. And all of these motivations, the inciting incidents, they just give you something, such a great place to start with understanding the motivation of like, okay, you were something else. Why do you do the adventuring thing now? Yeah, and there's so many different options,
and they're not all like, they're not all like in a negative experience.
Yes.
They're not all like suffering or loss. Some of them are actually really cool. Like, the Sage has one where it's basically like, you basically lived your whole life like in a library and you kept reading all these stories of like heroes and like magic and stuff.
Yeah.
And you just stood up one day and you're like, you know what? I'm tired of reading about this stuff. I want to go do it. Like that's great.
Yeah. So that whole section on inciting incident was one of the high points, I think, to pull out. And just another thing with the culture section too, There's a bit on language in here somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember where it lives.
So, right, you're talking about where they're going
Yeah.
into like the
Languages.
special stuff. I
Yeah,
think it's pretty deep in the
it is.
thing here.
Okay. Yeah, there's like a section
So
languages.
part of what I also really love about how they break down the character building with the establishing your character's culture, your character's upbringing, their they take into account their material environment. So like geographically, what kind of environment did you spend your life in? And then it's social environment, like class environment, um, and it's I feel like D&D is so much more bent on trying to establish like your character's like personal ideas, but it never really ties that to a wider thing. And this is very much like you are of a place and of a people, and that means something.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. So the languages section in you appreciate that the inciting incident also has no mechanics. Yes, that's true. Yeah. Like the background culture stuff has mechanics,
right.
but that inciting incident in particular, yeah, is just stuff for you and
Just
your
narrative.
director. I also love that they call them the director. It really leans into the semantics. Anyway, okay, so languages is on page 94.
94, okay.
And they have these language tables. This whole bit about this is their setting stuff, but the Kalian Empire and the extant spoken languages. But there's this one bit on dead languages that I
Yeah.
think is maybe what it's like. It's something that like you'd almost miss it just reading through. It's like who's gonna stop and look at the section on languages, right? But
Just a couple of paragraphs,
this
yeah.
bit on dead languages that is talking about how like we like the thing that I love about it is I think, and the whole culture thing does this I think really well, is that it's actually coming from a perspective of I think some folks who have some experience, knowledge, and sophistication in the realm of like anthropology and
Yep.
philosophy. You know what I mean?
Historical materialism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so they're like, well, yeah, the languages in our world are that they're making are related to an older language. And and in the kind of way that fantasy games, there's always the like ancient empire that was more advanced and we're picking over the ruins and all that stuff. They take that in the languages section, and one of the things that I think is amazing is they're like, well, we have this downtime idea for like projects characters can work on. One of them could be research projects to figure out, you know, how to revive one of these ancient technologies or magics that we don't have anymore, right? Or and they tell you like, well, yeah, if your character wanted to research, for instance, flying castles, right? They would
Yeah.
need to probably speak Hyralic, which is the modern version of Old Sky Elf.
Sky Elf.
And then if they really want to know it, they're gonna have to find ancient manuscripts of Old Sky Elf, and like that is so cool. It's not just like, oh, this is an ancient, like, because I feel like if I was doing a similar thing in D&D, I'd be like, oh yes, the elves of thousands of years ago spoke ancient Elven. Where now it's like, well, we speak French and English, but if I wanted to read the ancient texts, I've got to learn Latin or Greek. And it's like those are close, but I wouldn't call Greek ancient English. You know what I mean?
so
Like,
languages are also
that.
languages are not linguistic progression. The way that languages change or evolve or emerge over time is not a direct path. Languages mix with each other.
Right.
Some languages die out, and the only thing that exists about them is the fact that one particular language in the world, which is like mostly another language, has like one grammatical rule that doesn't exist anywhere else, and everyone's like, I don't know, this is just the way we've always said that.
Yeah.
So like you have someone who's very sophisticated, in their understanding of actual historical materialist and linguistic progression of society, of languages, of people, of like different kinds of groups mingling and moving about through time, and how the fragments of that settle in a living world. And it really shows in a lot of this.
I think another section in here that I really, really liked, while we're on this culture topic, was the organization section, which did a very similar thing for me of like the offering the options of the anarchic, bureaucratic, and communal organizations. One, I think they did a pretty good job of not loading any of those with like judgment.
Political, yeah,
right,
a value judgment,
yeah. It's like they're describing a. Hang on, let me flip to the right page here. They're describing these, different ideas, some of which I would assign some moral value to, but I don't think they do. And I think they do a really good job of, it's like, this isn't about like, making a statement,
it's not about
understanding how that would impact the character. And
right.
I really like, and it also, but it shows a level of sophistication to the thought of like understanding those kinds of material.
But that's also like a huge plus for me too, is the fact that it's not about your character. Like it's not giving you a list of like opinions your character has on stuff. Like, oh, like I rolled a 5 on my background and my character hates salty food. And that's just like, that's like useless to me as a core character building function. This is very much like, you're a person, and people by and large have opinions and ideas that are their own, but this is where you came from. So like maybe use it.
Okay, so I think jumping off from that, I think we've done a lot about the culture.
Let's talk about
Is there
the
any
classes.
other stuff? Yeah. Well, one thing that I wanted to talk about before we jump into that is the philosophy they have about rolling and calling for rolls.
Okay.
Basically, what it seems to me is that like the GM is not tending to roll like, how do I put this? I think D&D in a lot of senses has this veneer, which is not really true, but is in a lot of ways, of parity or equivalence between the monsters and the heroes, right?
Right.
Where we're working with the same stat array, I have a perception score, the goblin has a perception score.
Right.
That
and it's
kind
just
of
a
stuff.
numbers game, right?
Yeah. And in certain ways, like, it's not true because, of course, like, monsters have access to things heroes can't get access to. And, of course, any DM who homebrews stuff does a lot of that. Right?
Whoa, hit dog will holler.
But
okay.
well, but I'm saying it's like in the thing of like, again, we all know Matt
right.
videos here. And if you don't, and you're watching this, first of all, how did you get here? Second of all, thank you for being here. Third of all, please go watch Matt Colville. But the thing he does with the necromancer where he's like, rise, and then all the zombies pop up. That's a thing that like, technically you can use the animate dead spell in 5e to like, it's like, but the enemy necromancer, or that the thing where the evil god shows up and makes the necromancer come back to life, like those kinds of things that heroes don't have access to exist in D&D, but there's almost this patina that there's equivalence between heroes and monsters.
Right.
In the mechanics of and I think what it's going for is this verisimilitude, this sort of facsimile of it being a real world. The same rules apply to them that apply to us, right? And I think in the way that Draw Steel throws that out the window a little bit in favor of like, this is cinematic. So we do have that suspension of disbelief of like, I almost think of it if it's trying to recreate like a fantasy action movie.
Right.
In a way.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that came up for me was an understanding that like the section where it talks about how you would resolve sneaking, for instance, in adventuring, right?
Right.
And it's like, well, so when, here it is, hide and sneak. And it basically says that like when the heroes are trying to hide, the foe doesn't roll a perception check. The hero rolls a hide check. And then
Right.
and then they have these tiers of difficulty, right? Based on, okay, how hard is it going to be to do that? And it's all the tests, where it's like, okay, well, if only one creature or a small, who has a worse, whatever it is, wisdom score, I forget what they call it in this, insight score than the heroes is trying to look for them, then it's, it's this tier of check, right? Intuition, thank you, Noport. And if there's several of them, then it's this, and it's like, I just really like that because it's like, oh, I don't even have to roll anything for the, and it's like, I liked that it was on the heroes to succeed or fail. It wasn't that like it wasn't like the character, the PC rolled a 15 with a +4 and has a 19, fabulous stealth check. Oh, this goblin rolled a nat 20. That sucks for you. Now the goblin finds you. Like, I think this being that, like,
because that's not fun, right?
Yeah.
But what is fun? What's fun is the players saying, I want to do this.
Yeah.
And then rolling die.
Yeah.
Like, and so they literally, I guarantee they all sat around a table and they said, what do you hate when it happens to you in D&D? And I think they absolutely talk about this somewhere. I can't remember where, but they basically say, like, don't you hate it when you take your turn and you roll and you miss and then that's it, and then you just have to wait like 15 minutes before you get to do anything again?
Yep.
That sucks. Guess what? Every time you attack in this game, you hit. There's no such thing as that happening in this game because they said, we only want you to do things that are fun. We're literally just not even going to put the options in for the stuff we know isn't fun.
Yeah. And again, that goes back to that thing we were talking about earlier, where they're able to just jettison the stuff from D20, D&D fantasy that isn't as fun,
Right.
And I think there is a part of, like, where D&D over the year has changed a lot, but it has all this legacy stuff in the early days. And obviously Matt talks about this a lot, but I think there's, if you've been in the hobby long enough, you've seen these things of, like, there's a bit of Schadenfreude where it's like, ooh, the bad thing happened to you. Haha, sucks for you.
Right.
This game doesn't really have that either.
But because nobody actually likes that, do they?
Well, some people that I don't want to play games with like that.
That's fair.
But the point there is that, like, the D&D is stuck with that. Oh, Nat 1 is a flub thing that, like, they can throw out because they don't have to be, chained to that old idea, which I think is great. They do say that and the only time they do these opposed power rolls is when heroes are, like, infighting, which I thought was fun. It may not be the only time, but one of the few times that I think you're seeing this idea of opposed tests, opposed power rolls is when heroes are, like, beefing.
Right.
But I just like
it's like the PvP that they have built
now, of course, when you go look at the monster stat blocks, yes, you're rolling dice for monster power tests to see what tier results they're getting on their stuff, and they're rolling resistance tests or whatever, all those kinds of things they're rolling. But, like, I was really struck by that bit about, oh, when I'm trying to hide, the hero rolls and the monster doesn't roll, and I just assign the difficulty based on how many monsters there are, and are they better or worse than the hero at seeing versus the hero at hiding. I was like, oh, that, I haven't run it yet, but I think I'm going to like that a lot because it takes away that random chance of, the hero came up with a great plan and rolled pretty well, but I just rolled a little better. It's like, that's not,
Well, so let's talk about, I think that's a good way to bring up, like, edges and banes.
Yes.
And also the tiers of outcomes, so for pretty much any kind of consequence that you're attempting, like, an ability check in D&D is similar to the idea of the power tests in this, and that you are tempting fate in order for a declared consequence to come true, right? In this game, I like that they sort of borrowed a similar concept to how Pathfinder does it, where Pathfinder has literally mechanized all possibilities
Yeah.
so that you always know what could or could not happen if you attempt something. In this one, it's not quite as strict as that, which I appreciate, but they have these things called tiers. So you have tier 1, 2, and 3 outcomes of any kind of test that you do.
Right.
And in every single description of ability, it tells you what happens for each tier of outcome, and they're all discretely measured, and they're all the same discrete measurements, so that you're not having to remember like different difficulties for different types of abilities and things. They just standardized everything, and I think that that's awesome. It's going to make getting into this game a lot easier than I think a lot of people might expect coming from D&D, because D&D is all about memorizing extreme exceptions in the rules, versus this, which is, these are the rules. It's standard almost any time that you have the same thing, but it's like a different it's in the same category, but it's a different ability, or it's a different class, or if it's different whatever in that same category, it's standardized. Love it. Oh, so edges and banes. They took the concept. My favorite concept from 5th edition was advantage and disadvantage, because we used to have, before advantage and disadvantage, I can't remember what it was, but I think it was more of like a circumstance bonus, where it was like you get like a +2 or something.
In 3.5, it was all circumstance bonuses,
right?
And you had this huge
that's
math,
just
like,
math.
+2 from this and a -1 from that, and it's like, oh my god! And it's like we had to look through 4 books to remember how many pluses and minuses,
just to add up all the little pluses and minuses, and it sucked.
I couldn't do anything.
And disadvantage and advantage took all of that BS math, that nonsense, wasted time math, and it just made it into a very discrete concept of, you roll twice, you take the better one, or you roll twice, you take the worst one. Love it. That is a fun game mechanic. So Edges and Banes takes that, and it mechanizes it up just a little bit. It gives a little bit of spice to it. Whereas, like, you can, in the same way that, like, as a rogue, you're constantly trying to think about stacking advantage so that you can guarantee sneak attacks in D&D 5e. In this one, you can stack like Banes and Edges, and there's some math to that. So Bane is a disadvantage, and an Edge is an advantage. But they have it as like, if you have one level of either, it's just a +or -2. So it's basically, it's the circumstance bonus. That's a familiar concept. And then if you have 2 pluses net, or more than 2 pluses net, or more than 2 minuses net, I think it's just, you automatically get the tier above whatever your roll is. Which is kind of cool.
If it's a Bane, it's below, right?
Right.
And they cap them, right? That's like, you have 2 on each side possible, right?
Right.
And so it's like, if you
whatever you have the more of.
But it's like you stop counting after 2 as well. So it's like, if I had 3 edges and 2 banes, I actually have nothing.
Right.
Because
if you have 3 edges and 1 bane, you actually still have an edge.
1 edge. Right. But not 2 edges. Right. So anyway, but yeah, the edges and banes I thought was a cool mechanic. I do like that as well. The other thing I like is that the edges and banes automatically raising it a tier does away with another unfun thing of, I have advantage. I rolled a 2 and a 3. You know what I mean? And it's like, well, that's an 8. So even with advantage, screw you. It's like, no. If you rolled a tier 1 result, that is a tier 2 result. And if you rolled a tier 2 result, that is a tier 3 result. And if you rolled a tier 3 result, well, that's the best outcome other than critting. So we're not going to bump you up to crit, but you still get a tier 3 result. Like, so.
And like conceptually, it seems like tier 1 is either it doesn't happen, or it happens but with a minor consequence. Tier 2 is like, it succeeds and it does like the extra thing. And then tier 2 is like it
Tier 3.
succeeds, but it does, or excuse me, tier 3 is it succeeds. It probably does more than it was going to, and the effect is amplified somehow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
So, and another thing going off of the edges and bangs and the tiers is what is it? The levels of tests, because I think that's an important thing to kind of get at too.
right. So this is a 2d10 system essentially.
Right. And so what I'm talking about here is like, instead of me just picking a random number, oh, this is a DC 13 or a DC 15. One of the things I think with D20 Fantasy, again, is like, I'm assigning these random numbers to stuff, but I actually don't have that much gradation in my mind. Like, when the hell am I ever assigning a DC 12 to anything, right? Most people are doing like DC 10, DC 15, DC 20, DC 25. We're done. You know,
right.
Like, I'm not assigning, oh, this is a DC 7, unless it's like saves that maybe have a little more math that like, I'm making this monster and I know my character's average is bonus in X, Y, or Z. I'm not doing that.
Some of us actually do run the probabilities on people's character abilities so that they can sort of guarantee a slightly above 50% chance for stuff. But that's also a lot of work, and I'm not saying that is the correct way to do it.
And so but especially too when you're just making a judgment call in the morning, in the moment, my character says they want to do X, Y, or Z. How do I adjudicate that? And I'm like assigning random numbers to it, and I'm basically going in marks of 5. I think they took that idea and said like, well, let's just simplify that, right? What are we testing? We're testing how good is the hero versus how hard is the thing they're trying to do. And so the way that they did that was like coming up with these test difficulties: easy tests, medium tests, and hard tests, right? So instead of me coming up with like, that's a 13 and that's a 16, I'm just deciding, is this easy, medium, or hard? And then they're rolling a dice and they're getting tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And that's the whole matrix, right?
Yep.
And then they just have results. Okay, easy test, tier 1 result, you fail. Easy test, tier 2 result, you succeed. Easy test, tier 3 result, you succeed and get a reward. Right? Medium test, you tier 1 result, you fail, you get a consequence. Tier 2 result, you succeed and get a consequence because it's harder to do and you didn't succeed amazingly. Tier 3, you just flat, or on a medium test you succeed. And then hard tests, tier 1 you fail and get a consequence. Tier 2 you fail but no consequence, or no extra consequence other than just failing. And then tier 3, you just succeed. And then, of course, if you get a nat 19 or 20, you succeed and get a reward regardless of difficulty, right? I like that. I will say for me as a GM, I do feel a teeny bit nervous about starting to run the game, about coming up with consequences on the fly. That's something that I feel like I worry about. Because I'm like, okay, they're trying to make this test. I've decided it's hard. Okay, so what? And they failed. All right, so now I've got to figure out, what does it mean for them to have a consequence in this scenario?
Right. And I think most of the consequences, just from my first reading of this, my instinct would be to do things like limit, remove, or to like penalize someone's hero resources. So like, well, that's, I guess we can talk about the classes in a bit, but every class has like a type of accumulating token that is like it's like a power point. It's very much like sorcery points. But it's a resource, and every class has this exact same standard kind of ability, just sort of reskinned. It's a resource that accumulates, and then you spend it to do cool stuff.
Yeah. Delport put a couple things in chat there. Players don't need to think about the mechanics of difficulty. All a player needs to understand is 12 to 16 is tier 2. Roll, report, director does the rest. Loves that it's easier to understand the D20 because there's no AC. Also, there is a default consequence bonus villain points. That is true. That is, villain points are basically things that, heroic resources that the GM gets, the director gets to use to power up monster stuff, which is very cool. I think edges, banes, hero points, and villa points are the easiest mechanics to apply as consequence benefit if nothing is suggesting itself in the story. Yeah, that's a really good point, Delport. I appreciate that.
Right, edges and banes as almost like a temporary status
Yeah.
on your character. It makes a lot more sense, right?
So, I also love this one option. Let players pitch consequences and rewards.
Right, let them narrate their
That's fun.
successes and failures.
Yeah,
because that's I think that's also what this game wants to encourage more, is that it wants people to buy into the tactical, or to the cinematic heroism,
yeah,
and it's trying to give people opportunities to narrate their characters' heroic efforts, right?
Okay, well, we've been trying to get into classes for a minute, and I think now is the time. So let's talk about them. You want to take us away?
Yeah, man. So I think there's only 5 classes, right? 3.
Well, there's 5 in this playtest stuff.
Right.
There will be more, and we only have
so
level
far.
1 of each of these 5. So there's definitely, I think there's at least 7 or 8 that they've talked about are going to be in the full release, but I don't know.
But
that for sure.
it's I think there's a little bit more on the martial side than there is on the caster side right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I read through the martials like pretty heavily, and I just
chat says there are 9 total coming, 4 more coming from the core. Asked if
dope.
we want the list. Yeah, go ahead and throw that in chat. We'll reference it, I'm sure, at some point.
So my impression of the classes is that they are D&D and Pathfinder and all these other fantasy tabletop games have distilled archetypes down to a science, and this is not a reinvention of anything. This is, if anything, this is just a very, very good distillation of those archetypes, those fantasy trope archetypes, and then attaching it to their extremely well considered standardized mechanics, and then saying, well, these are the mechanics that we have in the game. How do these archetypes use them in order to be what they are? And I think they do a great job. So let's mention the sort of the standard mechanics that you see across all these classes, and then we can sort of see how they've been flavored narratively to fit these archetypes. Positioning, movement. This is the tactical. So the was it her tactical,
Cinematic,
heroic, cinematic? Yeah. This is the tactical part. The
cinematic heroic fantasy
expresses itself in the fact that your character and all other characters and all other villains and creatures and objects, the position that they share in a battle arrangement, in a grid, matters a ton. And it's very much like a game of chess in that you're constantly moving people in different ways to gain an advantage and to manipulate them into taking more damage or being unable to deal damage. It's all about moving. Like that's like the number one mechanic that they seem to have implemented, and then flavored for everyone. So all of these attacks, abilities, everything, it's about affecting the position of you and everything else in the battlefield, action by action. And then the other thing is that attacks always hit in this game, which I think is going to blow a lot of people's minds. Yeah. The fact that you just say, I hit, I attack, I do this, this is my damage thing. I do my damage thing. You are guaranteed to do damage.
Yeah.
And that is another one of those things where it's like, well, what, what really sucks, or what's fun? What's fun about this? It's fun when you do damage. Well, then why wouldn't you always do damage? Because that's always fun.
Right.
So
And it just speeds
yeah,
thing up because I think any of us who've played 5e or any D&D have been in the like low roll death spiral of
right.
just like
2
monsters not
damage,
hitting,
still
characters aren't
alive.
hitting, nobody's hitting, and you're just like whiffing at each other for several rounds of combat. It's happened, where it's like nobody's hitting anything. You're like, well, anyway. So I do like that too of like, yeah, that's not fun. So let's not do it. And I'm like,
Right.
damn.
It's just why
It's like
bother?
galaxy brain. I feel like this.
It's
I feel
so
like Drawsteel is just the galaxy brain TTRPG.
they legitimately stopped and asked themselves why
Yeah.
about a lot of things that
Yeah.
that because we've grown up with these assumptions built
Yeah.
into the systems, we've never been able to conceptualize differently. And they said, wait a second, we're adults.
Yeah.
we can choose not
it's
to
like,
do this.
It's like the anti-cargo cult TTRPG.
Right.
Like we're just all the cargo cult thinking, all the like, that stuff. Just like throw it out. See where we end up.
So yeah. So there's a few marshals in this backing pack. There's the Fury. The Fury is a barbarian. If
Yeah.
you know what a barbarian is, that's kind of the gist. And they come in 3 kind of flavors. So the same way that you have in D&D, you have class, and then within each class you have these branching archetypes, and that's like where a lot of the homebrew realm is, in order to like create archetypes that expand the standard classes. In this one, you have the same kind of deal. They've come up with the archetype, the conceptual archetype, and then they've come up with those sort of subtypes. So like for the Fury, there's the Berserker, which is your classic go into a rage, just like Conan the Barbarian, like strongman.
Yeah.
Reaver, which is more of like you're like a dex base. Well, it's not dexterity in this game. I think it's agility. So you're like an agility based fighter.
Yeah.
Think like your dual wield gladiator type. And then there's Storm White, which is essentially a totemic style barbarian, almost like was it like a druid who focuses on wild shape stuff?
Yeah.
So you see it all there. Like, it's all the same stuff. You know this stuff. Everybody knows this stuff.
Yeah.
And then they're not reinventing anything. Well, that's not true. They have some really cool ancestries.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah.
But for classes, you have I know I'm going on and on. So you have Fury is the barbarian. You have Shadow, which is your rogue, sneak thief, monk-ish type, all about being not direct engagement. Tactician, which I think is a really cool spin on some kinds of like fighter archetypes or things like that from past games. But because this game is so focused on the tactical combat, they literally created a class that just strictly engages with the core positioning mechanic.
Yeah.
And they said, what if there was a class that let you reposition the repositions? Because that's something that people like to do.
Yo, dog, I heard you
And
like to reposition.
I swear they made this class just for me.
Yeah.
And it's a cool concept because it's so specific to their system that I can't just say that it is actually just like your fighter champion, your heroic leader, your Boromir type, It's something unique unto itself.
What rules about Tactician too, and what may even be in some circumstances OP about it, although we'll see when we get into and actually play the thing, is Tactician. It is a class, just all of the classes have tactics in them, but Tactician is like, this is the class whose platonic ideal is one of the words we use to describe how the game is supposed to work. You know what I mean? So it's like, and he or she, this.
It's kind of meta. It's really meta.
It is really meta. But, and it is like, I do think it's really cool. But it is a strong fantasy of the battle leader, the person who's like directing and coordinating, calling out the shot caller, the team captain, like you know. And it also reminds me in a way. I remember back when I used to play Dynasty Warriors games on like PS2.
Oh
right?
yeah.
And they would have those characters with the fans that were like the tacticians. You know what I mean? And I was like, these guys suck. They're the worst. But then, like, you, as an adult, and you probably knew this as a kid because you were in that kind of stuff. I was like, I realized, like, oh, no, you need these guys. Like, it's really important that we have these guys.
They buff your allied mobs.
Well, and they come up with the clever, like, you know, we were just talking before we got on here about one of the possible combos in the Magic classes. We can talk about that more here in a second. But they're the ones that come up with, like, the galaxy brain tactics of, like, you know, physics and science and stuff, and how that's, you know, in IRL they were those folks. So, you know, even psychology, like how they were going to use those things to win the fight. You know,
so you can. There's a clear war game historical through line into this system, and like the idea of the tactician is what war games were all about. Ever since we started attempting to recreate like the Battle of Waterloo or whatever, you know, whatever the first war game was, I forget.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's something Napoleonic.
Something like that. Yeah.
And it was all because people wanted to conceptually put themselves in the decision maker's position, the shot caller's position, and say, could I have done better? Could I have made better decisions?
Yeah.
Having a full and explicit knowledge of the battle, my resources and my surroundings and my enemy, could I have done better? And it's such a people who get into war games because they are that kind of person, and this is the class that they made because they know they're getting people like that.
And I think that, you know, another thing I think too is like,
and they are those people.
This is the class too that like Matt talks about being his favorite thing from fourth edition was the tactician fighter. You know, and like the whole idea of that is like something, and it's that idea is going back to the wargaming origins of the hobby has always been like in the, you know. And so, yeah, I think this is their gift to those people who I think largely don't get a lot. You know, you have the Battlemaster Fighter, and that's about it in 5e, right?
Right. Which is my favorite fighter from all D&D.
So there was another thing that I was going to say, and it went out my brain. That's fine.
So one thing that I think is super interesting about classes, and I think martials are a good example of this, is that we tend to associate things like the Fury, the Barbarian, with like, or at least in D&D, it's like when you create a character, they say, "Oh, you're a barbarian. You have a two-handed axe."
Yeah.
That's the weapon that barbarians
or a
claymore, or a maul,
you know, or a
claymore.
You got a big two-handed fuck off hit stick.
Right.
Yeah.
This game has separated. They have cleaved the idea of the way that you fight or the way that you interact with the battlefield versus the tools you use to do it.
Yeah.
So they have created this idea of kits, which instead of going through a list of equipment with like random copper and silver prices and different like, this is a finesse weapon and this is silvered and whatever, they just say, what kind of thing are you trying to do? Are you trying to be the big two-handed guy? Is that what you want? Are you the kind of guy that's naked with a two-handed axe? Or are you the kind of guy that's in full plate with a two-handed axe?
Yeah.
Are you the kind of archer who is running around doing Legolas-style quick shots on everyone?
Yeah.
Or are you the guy up on a hill a mile away doing a long sniping shot to take out the enemy leader?
Yeah.
And they say, guess what? Those aren't classes. Those are kits. And you can do any of those as a barbarian, as a fury, as a tactician, as a shadow. It's great. It's
Yeah.
great that they separated those things out so that, again, they've removed all of this assumption and baggage
Mhm.
from these archetype classes, and they've made it possible for people to get way more mileage out of the aesthetic of the character that they're trying to build with modular
Yeah.
systems like this, instead of having to go, oh well, the ranger class doesn't have enough of a sniping feel to it, so I created this sniper archetype. It's a homebrew that does the things I wanted to do. They were like, no, we got you covered.
Yeah, exactly.
We did it.
I
It's
remember
in
the
the
thing I
game.
wanted to say. The thing I wanted to say was I cannot tell you how many 5th edition combats I have run that just end up with the heroes and the monsters clump up together in a
Right.
nondescript fighting environment and hit each other till one group is dead. And I think there's a couple of things and that sucks. I hate that, right? That
And
is
they
not
got
cool
rid
or
of
fun.
it.
They got rid of it. They got rid of it in a bunch of ways. One, you could do that stuff kind of in 5th edition if you wanted to. We played in a game. I don't know if you were in this at that point. I don't think you were. But in one of Jacob's, my buddy Jacob's 5e campaigns, we were up against this devil in like a shipping, not a warehouse, but a parking lot
A dry
outside
dock?
the shipping warehouses. Yeah, like a dock kind of thing. And the people had figured out ways to kind of break 5e around prone and grapple. And so there was like somebody was proning him and somebody was
I know
grappling him.
exactly
and
what you're talking
him. Yeah. Okay. And so, but so
Daniel.
there are ways to do that. Yeah. There are ways to do things like that with like shove attacks and shoving people
Right.
prone, tripping and stuff like that. But in 5e, you're like losing out on damage when you do that. In this game, you're not, right? When your tactician wants to make somebody go prone, you can choose an ability and you will do damage, and if you get the right tier of result, they will go prone, right?
So that's
or they will
another
be
thing
shoved
too,
or
right?
pulled or whatever. So
is all of that extra stuff are consequences or bonuses to different attacks that your character does. So like everything in this game is an attack.
Right. And I really like that because that and the enemies will be doing that same stuff to the hero. So it's like immediately, not only do you need
constant shuffle,
more like interesting terrain, but like one of the things that happens in like the adventure that they send out is a thing called the Fall of Black Bottom. And if you look at the maps, it's kind of like the Burning In from Baldur's Gate 3. In fact, I suspect that might be where they got inspiration, which I loved that. Just total aside here. The first time I went into the inn in Baldur's Gate 3 and we were like in combat turns, but we weren't just like fighting monsters. We were just running around this inn. I was like, oh man, this is a thing you can and the fire was spreading organically. I was like, this is something that is so D&D, but also almost something you can only do in a computer generated D&D in a way
where
that,
it's
like,
doing a lot of it
so
automatically
hard to, like,
for you.
Do the fire. Anyway, but looking at that inn and I'm seeing like, okay, you go up the stairs and then if the second floor has fallen into the first floor, the tactical ramifications of all of that are so much. Like in D&D, we would all clump up. Maybe people would try to shove each other into the bottom floor, but like you'd be missing out on attacks. So you're saying, do I want to attack and do damage this turn, or do I want to shove this guy down into the potentially burning hole in the floor? And in Draw Steel, you won't have to make that decision. It's
right.
Just, and that I
they
think
say, I do an attack to knock him into the burning thing.
Right.
And it hits.
Yes.
And it does damage. And you know all of that.
Yeah.
You know all of that ahead of time just because you said that's what happens.
Yeah.
And that's fucking awesome.
Yeah. And if you roll too low of a result on certain attacks, you might not push him enough or something, but like.
So we talked about, or we brought up the sort of heroic resources that each class has.
Yeah.
And that's what you use to like activate some of these abilities. All of these abilities have like prices attached to them, resource prices. So for the Fury,
not every single ability, right? You get some signature moves and certain things.
Your class abilities.
There's the class abilities that you spend your resources on. Yeah.
The things that make the classes distinct, the kinds of attacks that classes have that no other class does, that flavors them that way.
Yeah.
they use these resource points, these heroic resources. So for the Fury, it's rage.
Yeah.
So every turn you're getting, I think it's 2 points of rage, or it's based on like maybe your I think it's based on one of your core stat bonuses or something.
Yeah.
But you're getting multiple points, a few points of this rage every turn. So every turn you pretty much almost always have enough points to do like something that is more than just I hit him and do damage. It's always like I hit him and do damage, and I push him, 2 squares or in this direction, or I throw him behind me, or I change places with them, or I hit them so hard that I give them a bane. Like,
Yeah.
there's always something useful that an attack does. And I think that this is going to speed up combat a ton, because like you said, you're not having to choose between hurting something or giving it a non-damage consequence. You get to choose both of those every time.
Yeah. Right. Okay. I don't want us to like run on forever too. So I do want to go ahead and jump into I think that the thing I actually really want to jump into, that I think in a certain sense for me is emblematic of all the stuff that is amazing about this system, is that there are more things like the thing I'm about to describe. It is under caster kits, the kit wards that you get. So kit wards are a thing that casters get that are just like this extra fun little thing that, it's an interesting idea. I'm not entirely sure like what the original, like why the caster kits get them and the martial kits don't and what that's about. But
well, the wards specifically, at least to me, they seem to be like they're I feel like maybe because the casters are squishier in general than the martial classes,
like an extra.
The wards are like something that helps you stay alive by either, removing you from danger, reciprocating the danger in some way, or manipulating the battlefield in cool, fun ways.
So there's two in the caster wars that I wanted to talk about because both of them I think are really emblematic of the best stuff I've seen the system do. And the first one is the dancer kit ward called Waltzing Ward. Okay. What this thing does, whenever an enemy ends their turn adjacent to you, you can shift 2 squares as a free triggered action. And whenever a creature damages you with a melee ability, you can slide them a number of squares equal to your highest characteristic score. And what I love about this dancer ward thing, like the idea of like a dance fighter thing, right? That's like very much, you see that all over all kinds of fantasy and, actual combat like in the real world and all kinds of stuff where the flashiness of the movement and the distraction and the spectacle of it, the athleticism, how it works. That right there is so good. Let's see. Sorry. Heads up. Caster kits are probably going to change in some way. Feedback right now is showing an unintended reaction where Tactician gets to have 2 kits, and there's a clear most advantation of 1 caster, 1 martial kit. It's really neat. You can do that, but right now it's far and away the best choice. Specifically, Dancer described. Yeah. Tactician with Dancer is just so good. And I can see why they would need to nerf this in a game so much about, in a game so much about movement. But the thing I want to call out about this is, and again, we haven't played it. This could, as they're describing, be way OP. But the fantasy of it and the mechanics of it are so evocative and wed together in such an amazing way, in a way that I'm not sure I've ever seen another TTRPG do something as good as this kit ward waltzing thing. Because it's like, I see that in movies all the time. Like the guy runs up and swings the sword and they like effortlessly sort of like,
pass them by,
and then the guy stumbles past. It's like, and the way that this does that it's the fantasy of doing that, but it's not just iteration, it's like it's supported with the mechanics, is so incredible. Even if it does change, just how evocative and cool that idea is it really hit me when a lot of the kit stuff was like I was glazing over a little bit because it is a lot of text and we've only had this for like 2 weeks and I'm not great at just reading raw rules text like this. But this was a thing where I immediately saw the scene in my head playing out and how cool it would be. The other one I wanted to talk about was Spellslinger. The Spellslinger ward, Invigorating ward. Whenever you take damage, you gain a bonus to damage equal to your highest characteristic score, which you apply to the next damage dealing ability you use before the end of encounter. This benefit is cumulative so that you can accrue bonus multiple times and then expend it in one ability. I love that. That's so cool. It's like in, Pokemon when you use like Bide or when you use those, the idea of like I'm taking in damage and then dishing it back out, or I'm like charging up and I'm taking the hits, like almost a very like Dragon Ball sort of a thing.
It's very anime inspired, isn't it? Right.
So that I thought was so cool. I rarely have ever seen. I've seen, for instance, in 5e the homebrew of the the Blood Hunter or whatever it was, where it's like you're damaging yourself to power up yourselves. I've seen systems do that, but I haven't seen a lot of this like you're taking in damage and charging up and dishing it out. But that is the thing that, again, you see all the time. So that and the Dancer are both things that I'm like, oh man, I've never seen a fantasy tabletop game do that fantasy, but I've seen that fantasy in all kinds of media. And that I really, really like.
And, I think it's fun too. Like just going back to the waltzing ward, it's, what is the mechanic of it? Just remove the narrative, remove all of the flavor, all of the color, and what you get is you're moving 2 squares as a reaction to something.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that doesn't sound exciting. And that's also moving 2 squares because something happens is like is probably in like half of the martial kits as an ability called mobility.
Right.
It's the exact same mechanical consequence. But because they understand that like by narrating these things specifically in the way that they've done, by creating these archetypes and giving them like the tools in order to narrate their consequences in a fight, in a heroic cinematic narrative, they can use that same mechanic over and over and over again, but every single time it's specific to your character.
Right.
It's got so much mileage on it.
Yeah. Okay. I don't want us to take too much longer. So I want to hit on the last big interesting thing I saw that I really wanted to talk about was the negotiation section. I really, really like how they mechanized some of it. Like in D&D, it's just, do you have an NPC? I have a sense in my mind of what this NPC's attitude is, and the players are trying to negotiate, and then I ask them to make a roll, and I feel like I feel like I haven't like done a deep dive on the negotiation section, but I do love that they just added a more robust mechanical set of things to that bucket, because I feel like that's a bucket that really gets left out and is just so much is put on the pure roleplay of it. Of like, yeah, if your characters roleplay good and they roll good, then they get what they want, and if they don't, then they don't. And this is like,
to be fair, in order to adjudicate something like that, you actually have to have social skills.
Yeah. And this like adding the stats of like interest, patience, motivations, pitfalls, like, I just like that there's a whole section dedicated to like, let's mechanize this, let's support, because there is the fantasy of like, we go into the negotiation with the Thieves Guild because we're not exactly enemies, although we don't exactly agree, and we want them to help us, but they want us to help them, and do, how dirty do we get ourselves in the negotiation to get what we really need to save the city? Like, that's a fun dramatic setup. And in D&D, if somebody crit fails, it devolves into a fight, and which could still happen in this, but like, I just like that I can have in my mind, okay, what are the pitfalls? If they mention X, Y, or Z, that could be a problem. Eh, oh, they have a
They've
patience level, and if we exceed the patience level, I like that there's more mechanical support behind that idea in the game.
Yeah, the fact that they kind of gamified a couple of concepts behind negotiations, like
Yeah.
how much interest does this person have, and that's something you can leverage. How much patience do they have? That's something that you need to be aware of.
Yeah.
And then they're just like 0 to 5, like it's just a Likert scale. You're not going crazy. Neutral is 3,
Yeah.
0 is bad, 5 is great. Everybody kind of can intrinsically pick that up and run with it, and
Right.
it's not this huge like philosophical undertaking where you're like, well, but what people really say in a trade,
Yeah.
and this is how people evaluate, social consequences. Like, you don't need a PhD in
Right.
this stuff. It's 0 to 5,
Yeah.
guys.
Okay, at the end, I did want to touch on any dislikes that we have. If you've made it this far, you've heard us talk about us being really
Mm,
excited and interested in
really
this.
gushy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so if you've made it this far, let's end on a note of just some things that were like we'd like to. I don't even know if we'd like to see change. Just some things to note. Um,
Mm.
the big one, and this was one of your very first responses to it, is that it has such a strong sense of identity in what it is and what it wants to do that like you're thinking about the game you're currently running and saying like I can't do that in this. I don't
Yeah.
think, right?
Yeah, I remember when we were trying
Yeah.
to schedule this discussion, I was like, I just reading through this, and I was so excited at first because I want to take my campaign setting, the Beast Wilds, into a different system that feels like it will express itself in the way that I want my setting to live, to feel,
Yeah.
and my setting is not heroic.
Right.
so
Yeah.
that so immediately I sort of realized, wait a second, this system has such a strong identity that it actually helped me realize what identities I wanted or
Mm.
had to avoid in a system
Yeah.
in order to find a more appropriate system for the kind of games I want to run.
Yeah.
But I think that was a negative for me, just because I lost a tiny bit of hope, thinking maybe this
That
is going to be
this
the
might be the
one.
game. Yeah.
But I'm still going to play this game.
Yeah.
This game looks so good.
It does look so fun. I also think that for me, yeah. I also think somebody's doing fireworks outside my window.
Oh my goodness.
It's fine. I also, one of the things, because I'm not running anything specific right now, that excites me a lot about the game is that like I feel like I have such a strong sense of like what this game is trying to do that I can like pitch my game in that direction, right? And the
Mm.
thing that I keep coming back to is like a very like actiony fantasy movie. Maybe not full on like 80s action of like the senselessness
Sword
of
and
80s action
sorcery.
sometimes. Well, but like yeah, I'm thinking like you could basically do like Rambo 3. Yeah, I
Okay,
don't know
all
that
right.
Rambo 1, but Rambo 3, you know what I'm saying of
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
or
Yeah. Rambo 1 is actually not that violent of a
yeah.
movie.
Yeah. Well, and that it has all this social stuff and da da da. But
Right,
like
right, right.
the kind of like we're
But then it
mowing
devolved
down
to
hordes of
Rambo
stuff.
3.
That's the fantasy action movie that we're going that this is kind of, has a lot of, and it's not like it's only combat. There are the tense negotiation scenes and the stealth scene where we got to sneak into the thing.
You know what I actually also sort of along the same lines of the criticism, like I don't think I can use this to run my setting the way that I
Mhm.
want it to be, is that uh this game straight up tells you it is morally good, and that
Mm-hmm.
and that you should not be pursuing a character or a game experience in which the morality of your characters is a thing that is like divergent or disparate or diversified. Like, you are all good.
Yeah.
In this game, you are all heroes, and to us, heroes means you're a good person who's always going to try to do their best to help people, to minimize damage, and to take out the bad guys.
Yeah.
And like, if you're trying to be a villain or that edgelord, like lone wolf, my parents were murdered, and I took an oath to revenge them against the evil king that usurped the old king. Like, it's kind of going to conflict with what they built this system for, and they tell you that up front.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the thing that I question there is like, what mechanically supports that thesis? You know what I mean?
So,
like,
oh no, they have they have a section in which it describes, or there's a little dialogue box I read. I can't remember where. It's 125 pages, but it said something like, it's for hero tokens. So when they're
okay.
describing hero tokens, they're saying like, hero tokens is one of the ways that the director rewards the players for playing the game in a way that benefits the intention of the mechanics and the setting and the narrative. And that when they do things like, and they list a few examples, it's like, when they are offered an out that's kind of greasy or morally less than good, and they refuse it in order to accept like a higher challenge, you are supposed to, as the director, award them hero tokens, because they're playing in that heroic way. You're trying to incentivize that play.
Here's what I'll say there. They are explicit about that sort of like, okay, here it is. The group is presented with an easy way out of a difficult situation that involves lying, cheating, or stealing, but they take the more arduous and honorable path. One thing I think that is flexible enough to me as a system.
Sure.
That you could run a game where you don't do it that way, and I don't think the whole thing would break down, right?
No.
So in that sense of like, they have a strong sense of like the drama of the heroes taking the harder path being rewarded, and what I actually think, I hadn't spent a lot of time with the hero token section. This is the first time I'm kind of looking through it. What it occurs to me, in the same way of like inspiration of like, this is their advice on it. But I think this is the reward the behavior you want repeated type of like mechanic.
I think it's something different though. Okay, so most of us have probably played like Skyrim. That's probably a good example, right? Or maybe an even maybe a more appropriate. No, never mind. Skyrim's good.
Sure.
So let's say you're playing Skyrim, or Red Dead Redemption 2 actually is another great example of this, in where you have a character who has the ability to kind of be, you can push them in sort of a moral direction. There are choices in the grand narrative for your character that allow them to kind of like pick a side and determine which morality they want to espouse or support in the world, in the setting. And in a lot of these types of games like Mass Effect, Red Dead Redemption 2, that have like these plus minus morality, honor type systems, how many times have you tried to create like an evil character that you kind of gave up on because you just stopped having fun being an evil bastard, and you start being good, and all of a sudden you get like that dopamine rush of like helping people, benefiting people, the adoration, the admiration, the sense of like achieving a higher social status because of the fact that people have a wider trust of you because your actions demonstrate good stuff, heroic stuff. And I feel like it's in the same vein of saying, what's fun about playing games? What's not fun about playing games? And I think that they have a sense of the idea that people will try to be bad, but people actually kind of want to be good. And by rewarding that, they're actually, I think, trying to incentivize people to do the things that will actually make them have more fun.
Sure.
It's a
Yeah,
stretch.
yeah. I mean, but like, I think what I'm saying is there's so much lateral. Like, they're just giving you examples of when you might want to do this,
Sure,
right? Um, and so I think to me, it's like a flexible enough concept that like I could very easily transition that into like, well, yeah, if you're a character and you've gotten with the director and we've been like, yeah, you have a secret motivation of doing a thing, you know, with a different kind of narrative payoff, that I would be like awarding hero tokens if you do. It's like, so let's say you're in that situation where there's the easy way out and then the line, you know, or the
the
arduous path.
hero's path.
Yeah. And it's like maybe your character has a selfish reason for taking the easy way out because what it, you know, like let's imagine a scenario where the easy way out ingratiates you with a criminal underworld group that otherwise would be against the heroes, right? Because if you don't take the easy way out here and your character makes the call to take the easy way out, not just because it was the easy way out, but like I guess what I'm saying is you could use this to reward in character motivation stuff just as easily for a heroic as a non-heroic character in my view, right? Now I don't think the game would
Sure.
necessarily you know, I'd be interested to see if anybody tries to play a full-on evil campaign in this system and what that would look like. Um,
I think that that's not hard to do.
um,
I think the problem is in how we at our tables understand morality,
sure.
which is going to be a very elastic
Yeah,
concept across many
right.
tables.
So, yeah, but okay. Let me get back to my notes here. The other thing we talked about this a little bit. The specialized language that they use is a little overwhelming
Mm.
at first. And there
It's
was
a
one
hump. It's a
thing.
hump to get over for
There
sure.
was one thing that I saw that was just kind of an organizational thing that I feel a little nervous about. That like I'm worried I may miss how certain things connect and interact. And this was actually in the kits section.
Okay.
Let me see. Kits, caster kits. But there was a thing in caster kits. Oh, wait, I think it was back up at the beginning of kits, and then it shows up again in the caster kit.
Oh, and the thing about kits we didn't mention is that like we talked about it in terms of like character creation, or I mentioned it in terms of character creation. In D&D, when you like choose your kit, when you're choosing your equipment, like you're given that stuff, and like you just have to kind of hold on to that until you get better, different stuff,
Yeah.
and you sort of have to replace it or lose it one by one. In this game, kits are interchangeable. Like every
Mm-hmm.
time that you are choosing,
The
like you
respite,
choose a
yeah.
class and you are taking a break from doing your wave of fighting whatever baddies, you can just say I don't want to do the sword and board anymore. I want the big old two-handed
Yeah.
hammer, and you can just swap out your kit
And you
and
also
completely
could start
change.
to make those decisions based on a couple different things. One of the things that Matt Colville talked about in the character creation thing that they did on YouTube was you might find a treasure that goes with a specific type of kit that you don't, you know, that but and so you might switch your kit up just to use a magic item you otherwise wouldn't be able to use. Um, so one of the things I was looking at was this kit weapon categories, these like keywords for kit weapons like bone and
Right.
crystal and glass.
Oh, the yeah, for the
Yeah,
casters.
right.
It describes things in terms of mechanics, but it does not list any actual mechanics
Yeah,
for
because
them,
I
which
think
is
they show
kind of
up
cool.
later. I think they're factored in, and this might actually assuage my confusion. I think they're factored into the stuff
The
in the
bonuses in the
kit.
kits?
Yeah, so let me look at blood pact. You wield an implement of metal with a blood pact, and you wield an implement of glass with a dancing pact. Okay, and then that
Oh,
stuff is
okay.
factored in. Okay,
So basically all of these kits, these caster kits, they have a material associated with them.
yeah,
So like bone, crystal, glass, metal, stone,
right.
and wood.
Yeah,
And And each of these kits is flavored to include that as like that material as a
Yeah.
thing.
There
That's
was one
cool.
other thing, yeah. And it talks about how like crystals spread energies of magic abilities that create areas of effect. Bone siphons residual energy of magical abilities to create or enhance protective wards. Glass, your magic abilities are drawn into your body, giving you the gift of alacrity to increase speed. It's like they have specific things that the kits then roll with. There was
That's
one
cool.
thing
Yeah.
I saw.
Because the Marshall
Um,
kits are really intuitive. It's literally just like light, medium, heavy armor, light, medium, heavy weapon, and then they
yeah,
say, here are the weapons. It's a bow. It's a light weapon. It's a heavy weapon. It's a medium weapon. It's like
yeah.
very
There
simple.
was a thing with kit damage bonuses that I thought was a little confusing, where it basically talks about
Oh, the
how if your kit has a bonus to certain things, it automatically is applied to the stuff in the list of the kit, but that you have to
right.
go back and add it to your other abilities that use your weapon or your implement or whatever.
Right. So you know how they show the bonuses and they show them in three
Yes.
brackets? And so those are the tiers, the tier 1, the tier 2, the tier 3 bonus. What they're saying, I think, is that you have to manually figure out which tier bonus of your kit, and then you have to apply that to your ability. Because you
Right.
might be using a class ability, and then your kit gives a bonus to
Right.
that class
Yeah, but
ability.
what I'm
Yeah.
saying that's slightly, it's just a teensy bit confusing about it is that like it's baked into the kits. It's like I'm the only thing I'm worried about there is like missing something. Like if like just do like it seems
Right,
like
right.
that's a spot where it would be easy to do it wrong, right? And that's that's just something kind of to watch out. I don't know what the solution is because I think if there was an easy solution, they'd have figured it out and put it in there. So there may not be, right? But I did kind of notice that being something like, oh, like
I
in
think
the
it's the
same
only
way
way
that
that they
like
can
when you roll
customize
a
the kits.
yeah, in the same way that when you roll a 5e character, people don't know what proficiency bonus is and where it comes from and what it applies to, and it
Right.
takes a minute for that to sink in. This is the kind of that it's similar of like when you look at your stuff, you're like, okay, I copied this and I copied this down, but these numbers are a little different, and so Delport said something interesting in chat, which was, I think the importance of material will be more obvious once treasures or magic items come out. If you
Mm.
know what material suits your kit, you'll recognize treasures that fit your kit based on material. I think that's a great point.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, yeah. And you know what? That also opens up the idea for people to customize
Yeah,
a setting by customizing what materials give what bonuses.
sure. Yeah, you could flavor those differently. Was there anything else on my
Or even
list?
just limit them entirely and say like
Yeah.
there's no weapon or there's no metal implements or
So,
something.
I think that's
Yeah.
probably we've cracked 90 minutes here, so I think that's
This has
enough.
been, yeah, a pretty exhaustive first look
Yeah.
of a
If anybody
125
who
page
doesn't know who we
system.
are made it this far, if you're watching this on YouTube, thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate you
Uh,
listening to all that.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Wait, I'm Beast.
Yeah, we
Great
didn't
to
do a lot of
meet
intro
you.
up top, did we?
I mean, we did.
Brief.
You were like, "Hi, it's me, Pixel. With me is Beast." But like, let's
Yeah.
just close it out by reintroducing ourselves.
Yeah. And Delport, well, thank you for coming in. Your
Yeah,
stuff in chat was
Delport.
extremely helpful,
Really
and I appreciated
appreciate
you
the
how
prompts.
you're, familiar with this and the community as well, really helped out. Um so yeah, I think we may look at this again, not to do to maybe do like some character creation in a couple of weeks, maybe if we get
That
a
could be
chance.
cool.
So that could be something fun that we'll look into. And then I'd love to maybe try running the one shot at some point. That might
Oh
be the
yeah,
next thing I try to get on my docket. Um,
I
hopefully
saw
before the
them a
end of the
little
year.
bit of how they built the system with the tokens and
Yeah.
moving everything. I'm excited to see how far that they can
So,
take that.
all right, gang. Well, we appreciate y'all hanging out. We are not
Sure
gonna raid
do.
or anything. I might be back on streaming Final Fantasy in a little bit. We just bought a free company house, so that's a lot of fun. Um, Also, the only other thing I can say, I can't show y'all the art. technically, I think, because I don't have permission. But the art that came with this is amazing. I probably could have gotten permission. I just didn't ask
Excellent
in time.
stuff.
The art is amazing. You should absolutely check that out if you haven't. Everything MCDM puts out just has the best art you've ever seen in your life. So
These folks, they have a vision of everything, and they have excellent folks who are able to, in every way, artistically, narratively, lore, mechanically, express those in such an elegant way.
Yeah.
You should be paying attention to MCDM.
Yeah,
because we
also, and this is just slightly randomly, but they do, as far as I understand it, make it a point to like really pay people at the highest end of like the compensation ranges for various
support
things
your
and
creators,
stuff.
folks.
So I really like that too, that they kind of like Matt puts his money where his mouth is with that stuff as well. Yeah, excellent.
Sir.
Thank you all so much for watching this. We'll hopefully be back at some point with the character creation, and then we'll try and do the one shot if I can get folks together to do it to see how it goes. So I don't know dates for any of that yet, but we will see you guys later.
Thanks for watching.
Peace out.
Let me tell a tale of a world where heroes walk among us, fighting through the darkness left by monsters and by selfish men. A tale of glory rents asunder, sacrifice and battles lost. Our heroes know not what awaits them, and still they carry on. Let me sing a song of a family forged by trials and woe. On their own they falter, but together they will write their own tale of glory rent asunder, sacrifice and battles lost. Our heroes know not what awaits them, and still they carry on. What was rent shall be restored, what was lost now shall be found. The price of